starting. My name's Neil Campbell, and I'm just here really to hold this book up. And then I'm probably finished, really. But I'll just say very briefly something about it. This book's just been published. It's called Worlding the Western, Contemporary US Western Fiction and the Global Community. And it's a kind of continuation of the work I've published recently and probably for most of my career, really, which is trying to see, rather like the themes of this conference, how the West and the Western, whether it's fiction or music like we've just been listening to, or film, has traveled. I mean, that's a key word in my writing, that it's a traveling or a nomadic concept and form. And that my argument in this book, which could be my last, who knows, is that the Western, in this case, I am looking at writing and mainly fiction, is a response to what I see as a really kind of dark time, which particularly in my case was a response to Donald Trump and the way in which I'd observed Trump abusing the Western stories, using it for his own political ends. So if you think of his relationship to the Mexican border, if you think of his relationship to, in his campaigns, how he presented himself with John Wayne's daughter, for example, very famous. You can see the photographs online of that. It's really offensive, with a big cardboard cutout of John Wayne from the searchers behind him. You know, there was a clear response in his presidential addresses where he references Western mythology and Western history in a very skewed, typical Trumpian way, really, where he just cherry-picked certain ideas that helped embellish his own politics. And in the book, I borrow a metaphor from post-colonial critic Amitav Ghosh, his book is called The Great Derangement. And I borrowed that to describe what I saw going on in America, and particularly, as I say, through the prism of what Trump was doing, in my view, with the American West and how he was using it to bolster a kind of very right-wing political vision. So the book really came out of that, and it was an attempt for me to respond to that, what I saw going on, and how I found in some relatively contemporary recent American fiction, American Western fiction, by a range of authors who, some were American, some weren't. And most of them either had very strong connections outside of America, and I won't name them all, but people like the Irish writer Sebastian Barry, I'm going to get a Venezuelan writer, I think she's Venezuelan, Valeria Luiselli, Mexican Valeria Luiselli, the Serbian-American Theo Brecht, and I'm not going to list them all, but these were kind of quite sort of becoming well-known, but not that well-known. But when reading their books, what I saw in them was an effort to do the opposite of what Trump was doing, and this takes me back to the central concept of worlding, what I call worlding. That seemed to me that at the heart of Trump's misuse of the West was a determination to take America out of the world, to take them out of NATO, to take them out of all the climate change agreements, to turn his back on the world, to sit behind the wall and make America great again, as he liked to. You know, a very kind of Western, Turner-esque kind of view of the West, that behind the frontier, America could be this great country as long as it didn't have to deal with the rest of the world. The authors I'm talking about, the novels I write about, were putting the world back in all kinds of ways, and I'm not going to bore you with how I think that works, but get the book. It's very expensive. Steal it. Okay. Is the idea of through their different visions in using the West, they put the world back through discussions of all kinds of issues that they saw, whether it be immigration or race or the use of the climate change, etc., etc. And at the end of that, what I was trying to, I think, do was to write quite a political book about a new, well, in my view, a kind of sense of a new kind of politics that might emerge out of this kind of the obscenity of this great derangement. And to me, it was based on what I saw was the opposite of what Trump represented for me, which was care, love, and something which, you know, we talk a lot about at these conferences, which is a sense of community. And the writers I write about in this book seem to me to be engaging through their fiction in this kind of representation of some of those comments, some of those concerns, love, community, and care. And, you know, Christ, if we don't need that now, when do we need it? So it's out, it's University of Nevada Press. As I say, it's ridiculously expensive, so get your library to buy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Marek Paryz and I'm at the University of Warsaw. I'd like to thank David for entrusting me with the privilege of presenting the result of our joint project. There is a third co-editor, Chris Conway at the University of Texas Arlington. It's a shame Chris is not with us, but he's in our thoughts. And we are happy to have three of our authors at this conference, Flavia Bricioskov, Neil Campbell, and Sergei Zhuk, who I think hasn't arrived yet. The book that I'm talking about is called The Western in the Global Literary Imagination, and it's forthcoming from Brill in December 2022. The primary inspiration for this project was a special issue of Western American literature, which David and Chris co-edited. It came out in 2019, and the way I see this special issue is that it opened a lot of possibilities for the study of the literary Western in various transnational contexts, and I suggested to Chris and David, who, in my opinion, have a copyright for such projects in a way, that perhaps we might use this special issue as a basis for a different project of that kind that would further map the literary Western globally. And we were fortunate to find a team of 19 authors, so the book has 19 chapters. So let me just tell you about the structure, and you will then get the itinerary that we follow in this volume. So it begins with a section devoted to the Western in the Americas, and we go all the way from Canada through the US to Mexico and Argentina. So it has 6 chapters focused mostly on contemporary works. Then we make a leap across the Atlantic to Europe. The European section is a bit more historical, but it goes all the way from the 19th century to very recent literary works. Finally, we move to, as it were, the rest of the world: Africa, Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. This is quite a fascinating mix. We kind of trace the different genealogies of the literary Western in different parts of the world, highlighting specifically the legacy of settler colonialism, the importance of romantic adventurism, especially for the development of different varieties of European Westerns, And last but not least, we also emphasize the role of popular culture, especially film, of course, in the popularization of the Western formula in literature across the world. The price of this book will be even more ridiculous than Neil's. So think about getting your libraries to order copies. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Neil and Marek. And well, the book that I'm going to present now is well related to the two books that have been announced here. It's not published yet. Hopefully, will be published well before the end of the year. We are talking about a book written in Spanish and dealing with well the representation of the American West in Spanish literature. In a way, I'm just the editor of the book, but what we try to do here is to vindicate also not just the multicultural condition of the American West, but also the multilingual dimension of the West. The fact that this is, well, definitely transnational, transcontinental, well, motif. And it's interesting to pay attention to the way in which this sort of universal, global motif, theme, topic, as always, has been portrayed or represented in other literatures. We have taken Spanish literature, but definitely there would be many other examples in other literature where you may have, well, an interesting approach where you may analyze the representation of the West. I remember, well, a few years ago, getting letters from scholars from South America. They wanted to have materials on the American West written in Spanish, and they were asking me about this as well. And we have, well, a few translations, and in a way, I think all these subjects are part of the genesis of the book. Let me summarize the contents in a very general way. Well, this is the book cover. As you may see, we have both. We have the expansion of the myth and we have the revision of the myth. So well, we try to cover both sides of the story. I have a very brief introduction. I call it un oeste cercano, emphasizing that normally we talk about the far west for those authors dealing with the West. We have definitely not the far west. It's a close west in this story. We start with first part, focus on the expansion of the myth. Of course, we have to start with Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca and Los Naufragios. Normally, I would say perhaps traditionally, classical approach to the literature of the American West, at least written literature, was to start with, let's say, the journals of Lewis and Clark, whatever. Definitely, we have other approaches to the West, and we have the first representation, written representation of the American West is in Spanish, and we have, Cabeza de Vaca and Los Naufragios. So the first chapter by Mari Carmen Gómez de Galisteo focuses on this. Then we have another novel from the 19th century, Los Hijos del Desierto by Esteban Hernández y Fernández. This is usually regarded as the first novel, first Western novel written in Spanish. And then we go beyond, we start with the 20th century, where we have different chapters dealing with the 20th century, both with the popular West, popular literature about the West, and also with canonical writers. We have different authors here are analyzed. We have, popular novels from the first decades. We have, if you wish, the best-known authors of popular literature, José Mallorquí, Marcial Lafuente Estefanía. Then we have canonical writers, Ramón J. Sender, Camilo José Cela, Nobel Prize. And then we have poetry too. We have authors such as, Pedro Salinas and Gabriel Celaya or Leopoldo Panero. About the authors, you may see that we have representation of scholars from Europe, and some of them are from our country, and others are from the States. We have some of the big experts on Spanish literature in the States, Mary Vasquez or Gonzalo Navajas. and other authors, and of course our friend and colleague Christopher Conway. And we have also Professor Juan Ignacio Guijarro from Seville, or Fernando Guidazu, one of the big names in popular culture in Europe, and of course Aitor Ibarrola from the University of Deusto. The second part focuses on what I call the revision of the West. And here we discuss mainly the 21st century. We start with theater. Normally when we talk about the West, we forget about theater, but definitely we have interesting portraits. We have different authors, Martínez Madiero, Arrabal. We have stories in Spanish theater about the West that Manuel Pérez Jiménez from the University of Alcalá analyzes. Then we have what I might call the postmodern West, and then we have Ángel discussing Nevada and the American West in Nocilla Dream by Agustín Fernández Mayo, possibly the best example of postmodernism applied to the American West. Then fantasy literature, or I might call We Are Western, and Pedro Andreu and his El Secadero de Iguanas by our colleagues Andoni Cosillo and Martin Simonson from the University of the Basque Country. Very interesting approach of, well, this novel. We also have children's literature represented here. Is a chapter by our colleague Raúl Montero dealing with a story called Cabeza Nublada y Pies Ligeros. So the fact that, well, the American West is part of, well, the children's literature is also relevant. And the last examples are stories about what I call contemporary West in some cases, some references to the past, but we are dealing with very recent books. We are dealing with El Mapa de los Afectos by Ana Merino, Nadal Prize in 2020. We have the chapter by Iker González Allende from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. We have Amaya dealing with Silvia Comas' Pioneras, or Pioneers. Definitely the role of gender in the American West is brilliantly portrayed here. The last chapter is just my approach to John Bilbao's Basilisco. John Bilbao is possibly one of the best contemporary authors in Spanish literature, and he has done a great job analyzing what I might call the renewal of the American West in this story. The last part of the book is a peculiar section because we have three writers who deal with the American West, and we have their voices. We have Ana Merino talking about her experience when dealing with, well, might call some regions that in a way have been neglected. We usually talk about the Far West, but well, in her story we have the Midwest too playing a prominent role. So, well, this is Ana Merino's chapter. Then we have an interview with Pedro Andreu by Andoni Cosillo and Martin Simonson. And finally, poetry. We have different poems by Lucy Romero from her anthology Western. This is the basic content of the book. In a way, is, I think, an approach that may be relevant, vindicating, well, or analyzing too the role of the American West in other literature. We hope that this may open the road for similar studies in other literatures, and, well, we'll see about the reception from the readers. I don't know about the price of the book in this case, so I cannot tell you anything about this. Thank you so much.
That's okay, I can do it from here. Thank you very much for letting me present my album here. At the beginning I was wondering, well, maybe I made a mistake, but I realized that it makes total sense. This album was the start, the beginning, the germ of this album was a trip I did from coast to coast a few years ago, right before the pandemic, and where I visited. I flew into San Francisco and I visited a lot of friends, teachers, musicians. I played gigs, but basically I visited places that I've been to, and I've lived in, like New Mexico and Texas, and by staying in the communities. I think I stayed one night in a motel, a couple of nights in the car, but the rest I stayed at people's places. And I was trying to because it had been like some years since I've been to the States, and I tried to figure out if anything had changed, and I realized that a lot had changed. I saw a lot of individualism. The communities like where I lived, for example, it was all a mix of African Americans and Chicanos, and my neighborhood was all mixed, and it was colorful, it was alive. And then when I drove through, everything was already like segregated. It kind of scared me, and the sprawl of the gated communities all over, since in San Francisco all the way to the East Coast. So, and I wrote a lot of songs. The fun part, of course, was buying an old Cadillac in California and then selling it before I got to New York, which it sounds very romantic, but it's a bit scary sometimes. So I wrote all those songs, a bunch of songs, and when I got back here, I recorded 10 of them with my band, and the pandemic helped me to invite musicians from England and from the States, like Tim Easton from Nashville, to play in my album, and other musicians. So I think we made a very transnational, nomadic, yeah, all of these elements I've been hearing here today are in this album, and we are very proud of it. We had a great producer, international guy that really did a good job. So I would really like to give the album a chance and give it a listen. You can listen to it on Spotify. You don't need to pay for it. Or it's in Apple Music. It's also in YouTube. But if you really want to see the real pictures of the trip and my Cadillac, and the cover is the speedometer, which already sets the plot in motion. So all the pictures are from the road. So I have quite a few here. I don't sell it as expensive as these guys. This is no University of Nevada press. This is, I think for $5 you can go home with a really great album. Thank you very, very much. Yeah?
Good deal.
It's only here I sell it for $5. Don't tell my record company, okay? Okay, thank you.
Okay. I don't know if there are questions or comments. We know that there are other books that have been published this year, but this is just a very, brief slot, the one that we have for this. That if any of you would like to talk about their own books, there's also the possibility of having flyers, and we may put flyers of your books on the table that we have outside. So, it's open. This is not just the four guys who are gonna just sell whatever, and this is just the idea. Any questions, any comments, any new books that you would like to talk about? I think Susan is not here, but I know gender in the American West, I think that would be, a must for all of us. And Flavia, please.
Flyers, yes. I published in 2021, Ride the Frontier, that is a book in which I quote you, Neil, and Arthur in the preface, and it doesn't deal with literature, only with cinema. Okay, so I have a chapter on the genesis of the first spaghetti western of Sergio Leone. Then I look at the films, the pro-Indian cycle of films of the United States in the 50s, the traditional western, and I'm going to look at I'm going to prove and demonstrate how they are not really pro-Indian, those films. Then I'm looking at I'm talking about the fact that most critics have always said that the traditional westerns up to the 60s, there are no women, no heroines, and I'm going to prove, giving free example, that actually there are heroines, and the problem is that we haven't looked close enough or careful enough. And then I'm going to look at masculinity and femininity and what capitalism does in certain famous films of always of the 50s. And then I'm looking at Verbinski and The Lone Rider, that is a much more recent film as a post-western, and demonstrating how it is a post-western. But it is only on cinema, there is no literature in it. If somebody is interested. McFarland
What's it called?
Ride the Frontier.
Okay.
Analyzing the myth of the American West on screen. That's the subtitle.
Thank you so much, Flavia. I don't know if we have any other books that you would like to talk about. Maria, I don't know if you would like to say something, or any of you, or maybe it has been a long day. And we have to be at about 6:30, Amaya. This is at, 7:30. I mean, we have to be at 7:30 at Virgen Blanca. So maybe we should stop this in order that